First off, huge thank you to Heygears. And I don't just mean for sending me the Reflex 2, but for also finally giving me a chance to prove I'm not a shill. Because if you're new here, you need to know some Heygears history. The brand comes with baggage. When the original Reflex dropped, the hardware blew me away, but the resin pricing, the machine pricing, straight up insane. Then came Part 10. Then the new cheaper RS model, and suddenly the workflow clicked. Premium, yeah, but also smooth, simple, and really bloody good. The problem was, Heygears also have more lockdown machines, no custom resin settings, no real freedom, and the vocal community hated it. Me and other creators who said actually this is a good printer got roasted as if we'd sold our souls for affiliate cash. But fast forward and the new RS Turbo, new resins, cheaper resins, realizing we can use our own resins in it, more users, and guess what? People finally started seeing what many of us initial users saw. It's fantastic. These are now the only resin printers I use, and others are loving them just as much. And this brings us here, to the Reflex 2. So again, thanks Heygears. Hi, I'm Ross, and this is FauxHammer Videos. Now yeah, drama aside, it's fair to say that Heygears operate in a bit of a league of their own. Some people call it anti-consumer, but honestly, if that's your view, it probably more just means this isn't a business model you want to support, and that's totally fine. It's no different than choosing between Android or the less open iPhone. These printers sit right in that space between your everyday consumer printer and the more accessible end of industrial machines. Keep that in mind. Now, with this machine, I'm mostly going to compare it back to the original Reflex, and coming straight off the growing popularity of the RS line, I was so excited to be one of the first to test this and see what new innovations Heygears have brought to the table. So let's start where we always do, the style of the machine. Now, the Reflex had sleek lines, a professional shell, a big central LCD, and that solid metal rear frame. This, by comparison, is a big aluminium slab painted grey, with plasticky panels up top, and the only familiar touch is that dark orange cover. Now I'll leave it to you in the comments to decide exactly how it looks, not just against the Reflex, but also against even cheaper consumer machines. But I also need to ask, does its look even matter? That's a serious question, I want you to tell me. Anyway, onto the ports. On the back you've got the power socket and rocker switch for the internal PSU, plus connections for the PRM or new PRM2. Yep, officially both will be supported on this printer, but at the time I tested it, only the PRM2 was actually compatible. The older PRM will need a software update before it can run, and that's not going to come until after I've had a chance to make my video. The PRM2 though, yeah, it's a big improvement, mainly because it's finally quiet enough to not drive me mad. For anyone who doesn't know what these do, the PRM or pulsing release module is basically an air compressor, one that pushes air between two layers of release film when the build plate lifts, and that reduces suction, which lets you run smaller contact points for supports, which in turn cuts down on scarring, and this should also help prints succeed more often. It works for me, it's bloody expensive, but now that I've got one that isn't screaming in my ear, I'll actually use it. Would I recommend it? Honestly, it's still hard to say. In my limited experience of using the last one, it made a minimal difference in support tip size, and also I have to be conscious that I got mine for free. So I guess ask me again in about 6 months. I do need to point out that unlike the RS machines though, resin heating in this one doesn't depend on that special PRM vat. The method they've gone for heating is actually really clever in this machine. I'll show you later. Back to ports. On the right side near the front you've got microSD, USB and Ethernet. The microSD card slot should expand the onboard storage, which is already nearly 19 gig, to whatever size card you drop in it. But at the time of testing, just like with the original RS and even the RS Turbo, this didn't actually work. They haven't put the software in it yet. Now it does now work on those older models after I did both reviews, so it will come here eventually. I just don't know when. But 19 gig on board, that's still pretty decent. And also, Ethernet is nice to see, but sticking it on the back would have made more sense. USB's handy if you want to use it offline, but I just send files to it wirelessly. Also, same as the older Heygears printers, you can send files to the machine, but you still can't start the jobs remotely. Yep, you still have to kick them off by walking over to the printer itself, and the community's been asking for that for ages, and it's still not here. Some more external details to talk about. The base has adjustable rubber feet to keep it level, and there's also these perforated markings, both externally and internally, where some extra accessories could mount later. Now I do know there's a Reflex 2 Pro launching alongside this one, unfortunately I don't have it yet, and to talk about its differences now would just spoil the rest of the video. So I'll summarise the changes in the Reflex 2 Pro as we get towards the end. But I have to point out that in both cases, this is another Heygears printer that doesn't have a dedicated exhaust port. You need to cut this hole out yourself. But as standard, yeah, these are holes in the chassis which will allow both VOCs and heat to escape. And these aren't the only ones, because I also need to talk about the changes they've made when loading the resin bottles. So, this resin port. They've actually dropped the top loading design in favour of now a side-mounted port. Now the good part is you can now confirm the resin stopped dripping before you fully remove the bottle, which was a pain for RS users. The Reflex had a neat little button that you could actually press when you lift the resin, and then this puts a little lock in place so it holds it there while it's settling, and that hopefully stops the drips before removing. Honestly, I like that better, and I preferred the top loader in general for the same reason I don't like USB ports or cables hanging off the sides of printers, because it eats up horizontal space on your workbench. Now Heygears have also said they will be doing 2,000 gram bottles of resin, twice the size of these ones, but to be fair they also said that with the original Reflex too. Now personally, I've got to call it out, I think the top loader with a simple window to check drips would have been a smarter call. And the way this fills the tank is the bottles themselves have spring-loaded valves. There's a peg in the back corner of the vat that presses the spring, and then resin flows until it balances at the neck. Now I actually prefer this gravity-fed system to over-engineered resin pumps, and speaking of over-engineering, I'm glad they ditched the mechanical sluice gate from the original Reflex. It's just a shame they didn't stop the budget cuts there. You'll see what I mean in a minute. But I also have to call out that they're now updating the caps to have bigger openings, which lets the vat fill faster for current resins, but it's also necessary for thicker materials, and that bit is important, really important. I'll circle back to it. For now, let's jump inside. First up, the build plate. Like all Heygears printers, this one's steel, not aluminium, and that's a genuine tangible benefit as to why these printers cost more. Because it'll last longer, it won't get scraped as easy, a problem that you commonly see on soft aluminium plates on typical consumer machines. And the holes are back too, same as on the original Reflex, there's just not as many here, or they're not as frequent. Now those do help, they relieve pressure on the plate, which is especially important on early layers to avoid compression, and the plate itself slides in and locks down with a big lever on the head, which is much nicer than the RS's little latch. That's the good stuff anyway. On the flip side, those holes do leave bumps on the bottom surfaces of prints. And yeah, that only matters if you're printing directly on the plate without supports. Not many of you will. But it's worth mentioning, and like with the RS, the flat top design of this rather than a taper means it collects resin on top. The holes help a bit, so long as there isn't a resin model the other side of them, because then they just fill as well. So just like the RS, you'll probably want to scrape this clean before removing it, which is already awkward, but with the larger mechanical head above the plate, it's now trickier here. Now personally, since the Saturn IV Ultra's terrible plate design, I've more often just been covering my vat with a silicone tray and then scraping prints off with a blade and then a scraper whilst leaving my build plates attached. Yeah, it's probably not the smartest move, but it's worked for me now for the best part of, well, over a year. Moving down the Z-axis, we've got a ball screw in the mechanics with dual linear rails, and mechanically, the whole system looks solid. This is proper OG Heygears quality. It's just unfortunate that this is sandwiched inside so many plasticky elements that, yeah, compared to the older models, it just cheapens the whole feel. Now the vat, this comes with a clear PFA film as standard. There's a recess in the back right corner for resin to flow in from the bottles, and a pour spout on the front left corner. The maximum fill is 900 milliliters, which is about the same as a full bottle, which remember are measured in grams, not liters. You get 1,000 grams of resin, not 1 liter of resin anyway. The PRM vat is exactly the same, but this has 2 PFA layers, with the bottom one having perforated holes so that air can pass in between the 2 layers. Now it's worth noting that neither of these vats has a heating element, because the heating element in this machine is clever as hell, but still, we're not there yet. Because what I have to say first is something that did disappoint me, and this is the loss of vat latches. They were super convenient on the original Reflex, but now we're back to bolts here, and it does feel like a downgrade. Okay, the LCD. Positives first. This is a 10.7 inch panel, much bigger than the 9.6 inch 16K screens that we see now in most consumer printers. So the build area is 230 by 144 millimeters. Whilst we're talking about area, we may as well cover volume. The print height is also 230 millimeters. That little bump in size does mean that I can fit more minis or larger models on the plate without the whole printer being so large that it's unwieldy like your typical 13-inch monster. But it's only a 6K screen. Now I've inferred this because Heygears haven't told me the resolution, they've just told me that it's got a 40 micron pixel size, which works out at roughly 5,750 by 3,600 pixels, so yeah, basically a 6K panel. As for how that actually impacts print quality, we'll get to that shortly. One big plus is that the screen is so easily swappable. This is the best I've seen on a printer yet. It's got 6 rubber grommets hiding the same number of Torx screws. Unscrew them, lift it out, no flex cable fuss because the interface is solidly mounted into the frame. Old panel out, new panel in, screw it back into place, job done. The drawback, however, is that there's a recess around the panel once it's fitted. Even with the vat installed, the front edge of this recess is exposed, which practically invites resin drips straight into it. And speaking of resin drips, Heygears have borrowed from another brand's playbook, and I'm sure many of you know exactly who I'm talking about, because the Reflex 2 now comes with a wiper arm. And this does come as an optional accessory. If you don't feel you need it, don't buy it. If you want it, you can take your pick between a standard plastic arm or a metal one with a built-in heater. Now its job is to sweep across the vat between layers, keeping resin mixed and helping detect when cured bits stick to the film, in theory. Now what I do love is that they put the heating element into the wiper, because this keeps the resin warm but without heating the entire chamber. That also helps keep the LCD a little cooler, helping its lifespan. And this also heats up the resin super fast, like within minutes. I checked this using my new thermal camera, the ThermoMaster P3. I'm showing this because they sent me one out to show off here. And yeah, if you want one of these, it plugs into your phone with either USB-C or a lightning adapter. It runs in their app, it's got multiple color modes, and it lets you mark different points on the screen to track temperatures. You're going to be seeing more of this in future videos, but here's its first appearance on my channel. I'll put a link in the description. Anyway, I think the heated wiper is incredibly smart because yeah, it keeps the resin mixed and it keeps the heat distributed evenly. And it works fast. It's brilliant. But downsides, well, first of all, the wiper connects with another bolt, and where I've seen this before, I've seen clips, so it feels cheap in comparison. But we have to respect that maybe Heygears' hands are tied by other brands' patents here. The worst thing though is the cover over the wiper mechanics. Next to it is a sign that literally says do not remove, and you'd probably think you can remove it because this is one of the flimsiest bits of flexible plastic I've ever seen on a printer, never mind a high-end printer. It looks and feels just like the sort of plastic used for the RS's drip tray, and it is way below the premium standard we'd expect from Heygears. And honestly, whilst I love the ingenuity of putting the heater inside this wiper arm, honestly it terrifies me. I actually tested this by simulating a fail by dropping a support into the vat mid-print, and instead of detecting it, the wiper just ploughed straight through, carrying on as if nothing happened. If the vat had actually been full instead of half empty, it would have flung resin everywhere, including into the internals, through the wide open gaps behind this wiper arm cover. Yeah. However, I do have to be clear and say I do have a pre-release printer that Heygears are still tweaking, and towards the end of my testing period they actually sent me some printable parts to be used as side guards to prevent overspill, and this also functions as a build plate runoff holder. And they've also advised they are still working on the wiper motion mechanics, and this is going to be changed significantly before release. Now personally, I think they should be producing and shipping these parts with machines rather than users print their own solutions, but at least they provide it officially rather than rely on community solutions like so many other brands. As for where the motion mechanics are going to end up, as always, please check the description of my video for updates that come out after this review is live. Moving on to software, the UI is basically the RS interface, but now in dark mode. The front screen shows you a job list, print history, a settings menu, and then file access from USB. And that job list is cool because you can actually queue up subsequent jobs on these machines from the slicer. But, just like before, this settings menu order is a nonsensical mess. The important stuff you actually use, buried at the bottom. The pointless things sit at the top. Now they have added 2 collapsible headings, but even those make less sense than the lists underneath. Heygears, this is the 3rd review I'm saying this in. This is an afternoon's work. Get a UX designer to do nothing more than prioritize the menu based on frequency of use, hand it to a dev, reorder the damn list. Done. Oh, and while we're speaking of nonsensical software, I've got to bring up the accessories again. The wash station. Smashing models around a vat of IPA is daft. I can't recommend this to anyone. The dual bucket idea, rinsing from one to the next, is good in theory until you use it and realise that you're going to get dregs, and that's just going to drag IPA across your desk, making more mess. Personally, I don't see an issue with a bucket using a strong magnet-powered impeller or an ultrasonic cleaner, but if you use the latter of those, just be cautious how those handle IPA fumes before dialing in. Anyway, the cure station though, yes, it's stupidly expensive, but honestly by far the best cure station I've ever seen. The reason I'm bringing these back up is the firmware on this cure station. Now the firmware you need to do this doesn't seem to be publicly available. I had to ask Heygears for it because the over-the-air updater that's built into it doesn't seem to work to update it to this version. But once the firmware's there, you can now select cure profiles directly for each of Heygears' materials. That is so much better than having to send your print file wirelessly across to the print station every time you want to use it, back and forth from computer to printer. But the execution of these profiles on the device is laughable. The first page of the menu is truncated, you don't even know what half of it says. The options themselves are in no logical order, and even the wording is inconsistent. Like every single one should be PAP 10, POP 10, PIS 10, whatever 10, you know, the name of the material we're using at the beginning. Heygears already use stupid naming conventions for their resin. They can't even make it simpler for us here by having that thing front and center, the first thing you read, and the list be in the order of that alphabetically within these menus. So I'm going to warn the viewers here, if you've got kids around, please mute me for the next 10 seconds. Heygears, is this a f***ing joke? Clearly, this simple stuff just isn't a priority to you. That tells me, and therefore us viewing, you as a brand don't care enough to get the basics right. And this makes you look lazy. The reason why this is a problem is, how can people trust you on the serious stuff when you can't even sort out a menu? If you're charging $700 plus for this cure station, at least put the profiles in a sensible order. Back to the printer. The front UI panel is now flat, unlike the older models that had a slight tilt. Now I know it's a small thing, but yeah, this makes it harder to read without bending over and cranking your neck. Annoying, even if it's a mild issue, it's something that is less convenient than it was on the previous machines. Now, Blueprint as a software. I'm still going to stand up and say this is one of the main reasons I still use Heygears machines. The workflow, once you get used to it, which is different to the third-party ones, in my opinion, is fantastic. And coupled with the printers themselves, I no longer feel limited to pre-supported or well pre-supported models. Whatever I throw in this, I drag it in, hit repair, orient manually to keep support scars facing the plate, and I also avoid flat surfaces sitting parallel to the plate, and then I auto support it if I need to, after removing spheres as anchors. Add a bit of anti-aliasing and image blur, click print. It's a great UI that goes from left to right, you go through the process, it makes sense. And by doing that across all the Heygears printers I've owned in the hundreds of prints I've made, I've had fewer than 10 failed prints, ever. But with that being said, the software development just hasn't kept pace. With other brands slowing resin releases this year, Heygears had a real chance to leap ahead. Instead, the only notable update this year was the auto layout with overlap feature. And I called this out back in the RS review, the ability to auto layout models on the plate, but allow the supports themselves to overlap, keeping the models clean. But sometimes, rarely, supports would overlap model geometry too. Now Heygears told me back then they're working on it, and what we've got as a result of that work is a warning in the UI that tells you this might happen. And honestly, it seems to happen more frequently now. The question is, Heygears, why would we use a feature if it can't reliably do the one thing that it exists for, that its name says it does? Yeah? Right. Anyway, moving on, print quality. Heygears have always run lower resolution screens than their competitors, yet they've managed to match their quality. This time though, there is some detail loss. Side-by-side exposure test using PAP10 resin, which is what they said is their sharpest detail resin, shows more blooming on the Reflex 2 compared to the much cheaper RS Turbo. The results now look more like a typical 30 to 40 micron printer and closer to machines that use matrix LED arrays rather than cob light sources. Cob is sharper but less uniform, and this machine does use more of a matrix LED array, this time in the form of multiple independent LED zones that light up individually only where the model is per layer. And I've seen this approach before. The idea is to reduce heat and UV intensity whilst letting more light penetrate in the areas you need it. That's why Heygears choose lower resolution panels, because it allows them to get stronger UV transmission. And they tell me that this will actually extend the panel life quite dramatically. The reserved estimate is 6,000 hours compared to the 2,000 hours most brands claim, which, let's be honest, is often optimistic, as anyone with one of these new 16K panels is likely to tell you. But if this 6,000 hours claim is true, that is a huge win. They've told me they're still stress testing, so we will see, and this unfortunately isn't something I can verify in a month of using it. But they're saying that's the conservative estimate as well, so fingers crossed. And we also have to call out that, like the original Reflex, these LEDs run at what they call 385 plus nanometer light, and I think that plus means it's not exactly 385, but it's close. What we know is that 385 nanometer light is better for transparent parts. The shallower penetration of that wavelength keeps internal voids cleaner, and both Heygears along with other brands say it's also better for curing engineering grade resins for toughness too. And I've heard this enough times from various different brands to accept that, yes, this is probably true, but as somebody who isn't really printing for engineering grade reasons, I honestly don't value the benefit. But again, this all comes into the conclusion. But yeah, I've got to say, the print quality is visibly, measurably not as sharp here, but miniatures still come out fine. Like, I've been saying this for ages, it's difficult to rate these printers in a place where everyone's going, which one's the sharpest, which one's the sharpest, which one's the sharpest, when since we've got like 40, 35, I think 35 was the sweet spot, and this is easily comparable to a 35 micron printer. 35 and below, we've had more than passable quality on miniatures and things like that. So yeah, as soon as you stick out anti-aliasing and fuzzing options, this cleans up voxel lines. I've had no issues printing, but I, like I'm sure you do as well, have this thing in the back of my mind that after 3 years of printing and seeing sharper and sharper results, it is incredibly hard not to notice this as not technically a step back, but it just very much feels like a bit of a practical step back, even though I know that this is still more than accept. Am I making sense, or am I just talking shit at this point? What I'm trying to say is, and this isn't to you, this is me trying to tell it to myself. I know this is more than acceptable for all the miniatures I print, but I'm also looking at this sharpness result and going, it's worse. And I am struggling to reconcile that in my head. That's what I'm trying to say. Does this reduction in print quality matter? Probably not. Do I know it's there and does it bother me? Yes. Now, while we're talking about prints, I always like to do some featured models and shout out what I'm printing. These are scaled down versions of wearable cosplay helmets from a creator I wish I could promote. But unfortunately, they got hit with an NDA, forcing them to wipe their files, ask us to delete them, and remove all the content they've made about them in the history of their channel. And in support of them complying with that NDA, I'm not going to sit here and out them. But I would be remiss not to say that all of the helmets I'm showing here that aren't based on the Warhammer IP are by Galactic Armory. I just shrank them down and auto-supported them on this printer. So please, go and support Galactic Armory if you want helmets that aren't based on the Warhammer IP. But speaking of people in or around or involved with the Warhammer thing, I can't wrap this up without crediting two amazing sculpts from El Miniaturista. This is Sebastian Highway and Diego Ramirez, two busts that he's run as online crowdfunding campaigns, and both come with full PDF painting guides from a creator who's so good, so engaging, I can't help but hate him through sheer envy of his skills. Again, links in the description. These sculpts are fantastic. They came out fantastic. He is fantastic. How is he that? How is anyone that good? So yeah, cards on the table, and I did start with thanks Heygears for this opportunity to prove that I'm not going to BS people. I was disappointed when I first got this printer. I'm still disappointed. Disappointed enough that I actually asked for a call with Heygears' CEO just to figure out what the hell they were going for with this thing. And I'm going to paraphrase him, this isn't exactly what he said, but as he pointed out to me, this isn't a hobbyist machine. It's not even close. It's not aimed at hobbyists. They've poured so much into the custom screen and light engine, which, to be fair, the former of which I've not seen on another commercial printer, but they put so much into that compromises had to be made elsewhere. Not in performance, but in those conveniences and polish. No latches, no springs, no visual flair, none of the original Reflex's sex appeal. That's how they kept it far cheaper than their main competitor. And speaking of that competitor, yeah, I think this is quite obviously Heygears chasing the Formlabs market, right? This is a super accurate commercial workhorse with a growing resin library built around specific material properties. This is well beyond overkill for most people. Now, when we think about resin printing, the majority of us, me included, are in this to get detailed models, typically for our hobbies. But so rarely are resin printers used to make parts that have much practical use. I'm talking brackets, connectors, flanges, widgets and such. The Reflex 2 was designed to change that by making practical printing more accessible than the near 4K you'd have to pay to get this from another brand. And yes, this printer is still incredibly expensive, but I also think Heygears have probably intentionally positioned this to price it out of the hobbyist market. And if you think this one's expensive, there's also the Reflex 2 Pro. Now, as I said, I don't have one yet. I've asked for it ASAP, but at launch, they told me there were no prototypes ready. And from what I've seen, it fixes some of the Reflex 2 issues that I personally have. Some. Okay, one. Anyway, here's the differences. It's the same base machine in terms of style and build, but the height's been cranked up from 230mm to 350. That's going from 9 inches to nearly 14, which, depending on who you ask, is either perfect or far too much. The screen is identical, so the XY area hasn't changed. The difference is in the light zones. The Reflex 2 has 161, but the Pro has 1032. That's a big jump. And you also get the heated scraper as standard with the Pro model. Now, I mentioned earlier my concerns with that wiper, specifically about how much resin is going to be sloshing in the tank. But on the Pro, that's actually managed. There's a pop-out resin sensor on the left side, and the flow is mechanically controlled. On all of the vats, the release post actually moves up and down. but the Pro contains mechanics to control it. This means two things. First, the resin levels are properly regulated, releasing smaller amounts into the vat. Second, it highlights the fact that the normal Reflex 2 doesn't have resin level detection at all, and that's quite a staple on most current consumer machines, even if just to check at the start of a job that you've got enough resin to finish a job. Honestly, I just presumed that the RS printers had that feature too, but it turns out they don't, and I just never noticed in all the time I've been using it. So I guess that's a testament as to how little the lack of that feature has actually impacted my daily use in, what, nearly a year? But yeah, that's the Pro. Taller, with way more light zones and controlled resin feeding. Heygears have said it's built for high-performance engineering materials, damping elastomers, formed elastomers, and anti-static compounds. And I'll be honest, I've no idea what most of those even are. For me, the Reflex 2 Pro just looks like a taller Reflex 2, where I'm less worried about a resin spill. But I am genuinely curious to see whether or not those extra light zones would actually make prints any sharper. The point is, and I think everything about both of these machines make it clear, these are very much aimed at the prosumer. The RS is the hobbyist friendly one, and they've kept dropping the price on that whilst winning more and more people over. The Reflex 2 is more for people who start with, what resin properties do I need, and then they buy the compatible printer around it. Me though, I'll use it over my other Heygears printers for no more than the build volume's a touch bigger, and that means I can fit more models on a single print. But again, I got mine for free. I'm fully aware of the privilege I have, and I can't sit here with a straight face and go, oh wow, this is amazing, everyone has to buy it, because that would be such obvious bollocks. I'll be honest, I miss those nice conveniences from their older machines. There's also things that they could have added here, that many of us wanted, and they didn't, and that's why I'm still disappointed. It works great, but it feels stripped back. That said, I was disappointed in the original Reflex 2, and that grew on me over time. Maybe this will as well, so ask me again in 6 months. If you do want the latest Heygears printer or the Pro version, which, yeah, I'll be begging to review as soon as I can, now that you know what this is, and probably more importantly what it isn't, is it acceptable to you? Do you want it? Or do you see it as a misstep? Please, let me know in the comments. I've told you what I think. What's your take? If you are thinking of buying one, please consider using my affiliate links in the description before you do. That really helps these reviews coming, and it's also how I can afford to run this channel. As always, thank you for watching, with a massive thanks to our members on screen now. If you like this video, hit like. If you like the channel, hit subscribe. If you didn't like it, then hit what you need to, but please tell me why. I'm a big boy, I can take it. Please consider becoming a member to get early access, exclusive videos, and more. And until next time, I'm in a glass case of emotion. FoHammer out.